Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to look back on a week where the Tories just gave up on the election and look at the various ways in which they seem to actively seek to lose that election, or at the very least not care one way or the other. It's not even just about the concrete scandals. The chickens coming home to roost is turning into a swarm now. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So it's worth covering some of the specific elements of the concrete scandal, but let's look at some of the other ways in which the Tories are leaving themselves with no path to victory, whether narrow or otherwise, this week. The first would be the NHS winter crisis kicking off again early. In fact, kicking off again in summer, just like last year. Under both Thatcher and Major, as well as later on David Cameron, we were used to the NHS winter crises as a result of underinvestment in healthcare, but in the past few years, it's been on another level. It's the NHS half-a-year crisis. In 2019, while the general election campaign was in full swing, there was an apocalyptic scene in many emergency departments. You had patients on trolleys in corridors because there weren't enough rooms, then on chairs because there weren't enough trolleys, then on the floor because there weren't enough chairs. That anyone could observe this and believe Boris Johnson's lies about delivering for the NHS is incredible. Then, of course, with the NHS already on its knees, COVID completely broke it. Last year was the worst for the NHS approaching and during winter. This year is worse still. If Sunak thinks he's going to go for an autumn election next year, good luck with that. There are reports that hospitals are regularly having to shut wards and operating theatres due to dilapidation. I just don't know how much Sunak thought he needed to reduce waiting lists by in order to meet his pledge, but it's just getting worse. There's also little enough that he can realistically do now, even if he wanted. Although, given that he still refuses to negotiate with doctors, it seems clear to me he doesn't want to do anything. On Monday, as the concrete scandal was moving into full swing, Rishi Sunak decided to publicise the fact that he was holding cross-government meetings. Oh, was this an emergency Cobra meeting to sort out the threat of public buildings collapsing? No, it was a meeting to discuss his culture wars. In this particular case, his stop the boats nonsense. He's trying to capitalise on the fact that poor weather this year, compared to last, will be making it look like the number of channel crossings is down. Problem is, he said stop the boats, not reduce their numbers a little bit. Besides, I cannot tell you how much of a rookie political error it is to ignore what the public thinks is a top issue, especially in a national emergency, and focus on something that not only do most people not care about, but you are clearly failing at. This Stop the Boats pledge is aimed mostly at red wall voters. There are a few other areas that are targeted with it, but it's mostly in the red wall. But a poll this week shows that Labour have an 8-point lead on immigration in the red wall, along with every other policy area as it happens. I'm seeing an increasing number of political commentators this week saying that the public simply aren't listening to Sunak. They say that as if there's an inevitability, as if it doesn't matter what he says, they're not going to listen to him. No, the reason they're not listening to him is because he's not saying anything of value. On the concrete scandal, yes, the public will be interested in who's to blame, but during an emergency, what they mostly want to know, how is it going to be fixed and when? What did the public get from the government? The Prime Minister covering the scale of the problem and trying to blame others, and the Education Secretary saying she deserved a round of applause when her only obvious contributions to the role has been sanctioning something like a £36 million refurbishment of her offices and giving her husband's company a £1 million contract. Then the problem just got worse. Schools affected, hospitals affected, courts affected, now houses in local housing associations affected. Then there was the failed auction for offshore wind farms because the government yet again ignored expert advice. Against the background of crumbling schools and hospitals, you may think much of the public will have missed this, but for the voters for whom this matters, they know about it. It was big enough news that they know about it. They'll also know that this is a betrayal of the government's net zero policies and promises. Oh, and the person responsible? Grant Shapps. Just before being put in charge of Defence, the only department over the last few years that's actually been working, and then revealing he knew nothing about the military. Best gaffe of the week was thinking that the Air Force managed our fleet of aircraft carriers. Still, I'm sure this won't interfere with his ability to give Tory donors loads of public contracts. Might be lucky if we have any aircraft carriers left if the election doesn't come sooner rather than later. And the thing about the sheer number of Tory fails this week, sometimes it's helpful to have all your bad news come out at once, so that most of them are concealed by whichever is the most newsworthy. But it works best when the really newsworthy thing is not the government's fault. All of these were the direct fault of the Tories. I mean, look at the week in headlines. So we started off schools crumbling because the Tories cut the funding, and then Sunak cut it more savagely again. Then there was the news that water companies were blatantly breaking the law by dumping untreated sewage on dry days. The government are doing nothing. Again, to those who care, including the Conservative heartlands, they'll have heard this. Then we have an escaped prisoner highlighting the massive cuts in funding for the prison service. It's all very well talking about tougher sentences, but if you're funding fewer prison places, how does that work? And that's just this last week. That is just this last week. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.